طيب, inshallah, we're going to get started now. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مباركا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا معنا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم انا نعوذ بك من شر الفتن ما ظهر منها وما بطن. ادخلنا في حفظك وحرزك وكنفك ورعايتك من كل سوء ومكروه أنت به عليم. اللهم فك الكرب عنا وعن كل مكروب من أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم أنت به عليم. اللهم يا غياث المستغيثين ويا مجيب السائلين نسألك فرجا قريبا عاجلا غير آجل لإخواننا المستضعفين في كل مكان. اللهم فك عن إخواننا المستضعفين في غزة ضائقتهم. اللهم انصرهم نصرا عزيزا مؤزرا. اللهم انصرهم نصرا عزيزا مؤزرا. اللهم امددهم بمددك وانصرهم بجند من جندك. اللهم عجل بزوال الظالمين. اللهم عجل بزوال الظالمين. اللهم عجل بزوال الظالمين. اللهم عليك بهم فإنهم لا يعجزونك. اللهم إن السماء سماؤك وإن الأرض أرضك وإن البحر بحرك وإن الظالمين لا يعجزونك فاكفناهم بما شئت وكيف شئت يا رب العالمين. واشف صدور قوم مؤمنين. اللهم اشف صدور قوم مؤمنين. أبرم لأمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم إبرام رشد يعز فيه أهل طاعتك ويحكم فيه بشريعتك. ولي أمورنا خيارنا ولا تولي أمورنا شرارنا ولا تسلط علينا بذنوبنا من لا يخافك ولا يرحمنا. اللهم لا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا. اللهم لا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا. اللهم لا تجعل للكافرين ولا للمنافقين ولا للظالمين علينا سبيلا. اللهم لا تجعل لهم علينا سبيلا. اللهم ربنا لا تجعل لهم علينا سبيلا. اللهم اختم لنا بخير أجمعين والحقنا بالصالحين واجعلنا من ورثة جناتك جنات النعيم يا أرحم الراحمين. Oh Allah, we call upon you, we pray to you, we beseech you, we ask you by your names and attributes to facilitate for us our affairs. Ya Allah, we ask you to guide us in our difficulties, our trials in our life. Ya Allah, we ask you to better the condition of the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We seek refuge in you, Ya Allah, from trials and tribulations and difficulties. Ya Allah, we ask you to protect us from all trials and tribulations, apparent and subtle. Ya Allah, don't make our fitna in our deen. Make us steadfast upon the right path. Guide us to your pleasure. Ya Allah, we ask you to grant healing for the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the east and west. Ya Allah, grant healing for the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the east and west. Ya Allah, give charge of our affairs to the best of us, not the worst of us. Ya Allah, give charge of our affairs to the best of us, not the worst of us. Ya Allah, we ask you to give charge of our affairs to the best of us, not the worst of us. And to give strength to the Ummah, to give rise to justice and to give demise to injustice. Ya Allah, make the best of our actions the last of our actions, the best of our days the last of our days. And the best day is the day that we meet you and you're pleased with us, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ameen, ameen, wa akhdan alhamdulillah bil alameen. Amma ba'd, jazakumullah khair for attending today. We have a special Friday forum. We have our dear brother and Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Rahman, joining us for a subject that's very timely and very important for us to reflect about and think about right now. A lot of things are happening in the world and they're happening very fast. And before we get into the subject, as we normally do, Ismail, go by mama, Jazakallah khair. Before we get into the subject, we want to mention some announcements as we normally do. There are a few events that you should take note of. One of them is happening tomorrow, and that's going to be with our beloved Shaykh, Shaykh Qatanani. There's a special event where there's going to be a dua. Sorry, not tomorrow, Sunday, October 8, I think it is, or October 6. It's going to be in Patterson on Palestine Way at 2 p.m. It's going to be a stance for Palestine, for Gaza. There's an opening dua with our beloved Shaykh Qatanani. Please try your best to attend it and be there. The second event is a special event that's going to be held next Saturday, hosted by UHR, United Hands Relief. So the October 6th Day of Action is titled 1 Year of Genocide and 76 Years of Resilience. There's actually a bunch of organizations that are collaborating for it. Again, it's 2 p.m. in Patterson this Sunday. A Night for Palestine, again with respected guests, hosted by United Hands Relief, is for us to, again, show renewed support for Gaza and Palestine. The details you could find in the email or on our Facebook page or on the website, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We have a lot of things happening in the masjid, just as we always do, alhamdulillah, between here and ICPC Patterson and Masjid Yunus. We have our courses in this masjid that run every Sunday and Tuesday. Sundays we have our class on Quranic themes. It's every Sunday at 7 p.m. And Tuesday we have our commentary on Riyadh al-Salihin. That's after Salat al-Isha on Tuesdays. And then we have the courses with Shaykh Qatanani every Thursday on Usul Fiqh. We have Shaykh Ismail doing 2 courses in Masjid Yunus on Mondays and Wednesdays, Tafsir and Tazkiyah. And you could find all of these details on the website. MashaAllah, we have something every single day. In the masjid, we have our school, our Quran school, our general program. All of these things, if you're coming for the first time, we just repeat them so that you make sure you plug yourself in a meaningful and productive way. A lot of things happening at the masjid. May Allah bless our efforts. Allahumma ameen. To start the subject, I was reflecting for the past few days on how things are progressing. We're in October. It's been 1 full year since the genocide against Gaza started. 1 full year. And when you reflect on the direction it's going, first off, none of us would have expected a year later and it's still ongoing. And furthermore, none of us would have expected a year later and one of the most powerful armies in the world would still not have the capacity to subdue the willpower of our brothers and sisters in Gaza. So alhamdulillah, this is a remarkable and inspiring thing. May Allah Azza wa Jal make them strong against their enemy. And may Allah Azza wa Jal bring change for humanity through what's happening right now in the world. I believe that we're at the beginnings of a change for humanity. A lot of things are rapidly changing. If you've been alive for the past 30 plus years, the amount of events that happened, especially in the past 25 years or so, are so rapid. The world has become a completely different place. So many wars waged, whether you're talking about against Iraq, Afghanistan, you're talking about the challenges and struggles of the Muslim world through the Arab Spring. We're talking about Yemen. We're talking about Egypt. Talking about countries in North Africa, Tunis, and otherwise. All of these struggles and these pains and these rapid changes, all continuing to intensify, not getting any less. And we're seeing things that are very alarming in terms of people who are leading the world today. We're at a time of big change for what's happening in our country. There's supposed to be elections soon, and there's so much uncertainty. There's so much confusion. That's not even just touching upon the economic instability that we're facing ever since COVID happened, and it's increasing. And besides that, all of the false ideologies that are continuing to become widespread in society, talking about things that change people's fitrah, sexual expression, atheism, and all these things, gender identity, all these false ideologies and confusing things, the misinformation, all of this leads the believer to wonder, well, how am I supposed to navigate these waters? How am I supposed to deal with these situations? Are we in the end of times? That's one thing I want to reflect on with my beloved Shaykh Muhammad. Are we in the end of times? Furthermore, what does the Hadith tradition say about navigating difficult times? What are common misconceptions about the end of time? There's an entire genre in Hadith literature. Books were written about al-fitan wal-malahim. What is fitna? How did the companions deal with the concept of fitna? What are some hadiths that can perhaps guide us in dealing with the situation at hand? Because it is something we're dealing with, a critical stage in human history, and rapidly changing circumstances need us to be very aware, need us to be very mindful, and need us to be very careful in our responses and our reactions to things. So, inshallah, that's the discussion for today. As we normally have, we have our Slido here. And I just want to ask someone if you could please keep that door closed so we don't hear the door to downstairs, so we don't hear the loud noises that are coming from downstairs, right? Join us for the conversation. Send us your questions. We'll try to best answer them. I don't claim to have all the answers for everything. I don't. I just brought this subject to reflect with you as someone who's looking for guidance myself. I pray that Allah Azza wa Jal gives it to us, protects us from the harms, and gives us sadad and tawfiq. So I'm going to pass it over to my beloved brother Shaykh Muhammad to start us off with some reflections. What does the subject bring to you, your mind, for the get-go, and what would you like to share with us?
جزاك الله خير. الله يبارك فيك شيخ. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا وارفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. So the topic of the end of times is a very interesting topic for a lot of people. It's something that catches a lot of people's attention. And I remember just on a personal level, there was years ago, this is over 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was a series that came out on the internet. And those who are older, they know what it is. I'm not going to mention the name because the series has things that are not fully accurate. But the series spoke about, it was 40 or 50 videos, and it spoke about the end of times and conspiracies about the end of times and different things and how the time is coming. I remember I was in high school, and the video just made rounds, millions of views, everyone was watching them. And I watched it, and that was a switch for me at that moment. Those videos about the end of times, because it was made by Muslims, and although they had things in there that were not correct, they brought a lot of ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ about the end of times, about Dajjal and things like this. And at the end of it all, you're certain that the end of times is coming, and you want to be on the right side. There's going to be two groups of people. There's going to be people who are on the wrong side, and there's going to be people on the right side. And so when you read about the end of times and you read about this imminent danger that's coming, the Dajjal and all of the fitan and the trials and the tribulations that are coming, it pushes you to want to fix up before it comes. Because once it comes, the end is here, right? And when it comes to knowing when it is, no one knows when it is. Whether that's Malakun Muqarrab, a close angel to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or Nabiyyun Mursal, or a messenger. No one knows the end of times. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Taha, when speaking to Musa alayhi salam, إِنَّ السَّاعَةَ آتِيَةٌ أَكَادُ أُخْفِيهَا لِتُجْزَى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا تَسْعَى. That surely, indeed, the hour is coming. أَكَادُ أُخْفِيهَا. I almost have hit it. And the scholars, they say there's different interpretations of this ayah, but some of them say that the Arabs used to say, كَتَمْتُ سِرَّكَ أَكَادُ أُخْفِيهَا مِن نَفْسِي. That I hid your secret to such an extent that I almost hid it from myself. So some of the scholars, they say that Allah is saying, أَكَادُ أُخْفِيهَا. I've hidden it to such an extent that I've almost hidden it. If it was possible to hide it from myself, I would have hid it from myself. That's the extent of how hidden as-sa'a is. And the Shaykh also, he recited some ayat in Aisha today, that as-sa'a la ya'ti illa baghta. It comes suddenly. No one's going to expect it. So when it comes to knowing when it is exactly, none of us will know when it is. And the Quran never explicitly says when it is. And even the signs that the Quran mentions, it mentions bit-tanbih. ليس بالتصريح. It never says that these are the exact signs. It just alludes to the signs. But the Prophet ﷺ, out of his mercy for us, out of Allah's mercy for us and the Prophet's mercy for us, he told us of the warnings of the end of times, to allow us to be alerted, to allow us to be on high alert. And one can say that the importance of studying the end of times is important because why? Because it's mentioned in one of the most important hadith. Which hadith is that? A hadith that we always mention, and we say that this is a pivotal hadith of our deen. Hadith Jibreel. When Jibreel ﷺ comes to the Prophet ﷺ, he goes over Islam, the practical acts, al-Iman, the theological aspects, ihsan, the spiritual aspects, and then he asks the Prophet ﷺ, أخبرني عن الساعة. Tell me about the hour. When is the hour? And the Prophet ﷺ responds, ما المسؤول بأعلم من السائل. That the one who is being asked is no more aware of the end when it is than the one asking. So that's not important. When is it is not important. But then he asks, فأخبرني عن أماراتها. Then tell me about its signs. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he starts listing some of the signs. He says, أن تلد الأمة ربتها. That the servant woman, the slave woman, she gives birth to her master. وأن ترى الحفاة العراة العالة رعاء الشاء يتطاولون في البنيان. You see the barefooted, naked shepherd Arabs building and competing against one another in building high structures, high buildings. You can only imagine how maybe far-fetched that might have sounded to the Sahaba. But that's something that happened within our parents' lifetime and our lifetime. People who were completely poor and destitute, within years, within decades, have the highest buildings in the world in their land. That should make shivers go down your spine. That 1400 years ago, the Prophet ﷺ is telling this. And why is he telling us this? Because when you start seeing these signs, you say that if this is true, then everything else is true. If this came, then everything else is coming. And so even we see in the Hadith that as-Sahaba كانوا يتدارسون علامات الساعة. They used to speak about the end of times. Because why? It used to push them. It used to increase their iman. It used to increase their certainty in the message. And it used to also push them towards action. So I think there's a lot of benefit that we can get. Not to be apocalyptic. I think because a lot of people, when they start speaking about the end of times, they become apocalyptic and they think that that's it. Like we just drop everything. Khalas, I don't need to go to school tomorrow and I shouldn't work. I should go up to work because there's not really much left. But the Sahaba, they had a completely different outlook. Maybe Shaykh, you can share on that. Like it pushed them towards action. Like despite the fact that they knew that the end of time was coming. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Bu'ithtu ana was-sa'a ka-hatain." That I and the hour were sent like this, like these two. And the scholars, they say, what does it mean? That the last hour and the Prophet being sent is like this, is this close. And they say that the distance between these two fingers, the top of these two fingers, that's how much time is left. So the Prophet ﷺ said this. And the Sahaba thought that the end of times would come towards the end in their lifetime. But that didn't stop them from acting. Like look at what they did. Look at how much they accomplished. Within 2 years of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's lifetime, Umar radiallahu anhu's lifetime, they defeated the superpowers of their time, Persia and Rome and Egypt. They went into these lands. Had they thought this apocalyptically, like, okay, if the Prophet was saying that the end of times is near, then we probably only have like 10, 15, 20 years. And khalas, there's no meaning of going to the doorsteps of Rome and Persia. But it pushed them. It made them act. And that's what the end of times, or going over the end of times, or reminding ourselves about the end of time should do. It should move us towards action.
Shaykh, Allah yabarak feek. I love that point about not being apocalyptic, and I think that's a key reason. Many people, when they probably saw the title, "End of Times," oh, what's that? It's the end of the world. Let me go listen to what this is all about. Right? That's not what this is about whatsoever. But why does it even come to our mind? If we're not sure that this is the end of time, then why does it even come to my mind to think about now and the signs of the end of time? Why? Because there are a lot of signs. There are a lot of signs that are very alarming and very concerning. One of these signs is senseless murder. Prophet ﷺ tells us that, in the end of times, there will be the volume of senseless death will be unimaginable, right? يكثر الهرج. What is الهرج? الفتنة واختلاط الأمور. Things will be so confusing. لا يدري القاتل فيما قتل ولا المقتول فيما قتل. And when we look at our reality, well, that makes a whole lot of sense. This guy who goes to the operations room where they control their drones, it's like he's going to an arcade. That's what it's like. He sits in this nice, luxurious seat. He's flying this drone from behind a screen, and he presses a button that wipes out a building or a neighborhood. Let's be real. 73 tons of bombs in Beirut, which is one of the biggest capitals in the Muslim world. It's crazy. How could you get someone to convince millions of people that is okay? Why does the end of times come to my mind when we're thinking about what's happening in the world today? Have any of you guys ever thought we would see a living example of Fir'aun able to speak to the masses, millions of people in the progressed world that we live in, quote unquote, and convince them that there's a good reason to kill young children? I mentioned this multiple times because it's so heinous and unimaginable. I can't believe I lived to see an example of that. I cannot believe it, right? I see it in the Quran. The Quran says it. Fir'aun said, what? We will kill them every other year. Why? He wanted to preserve his economy. We had modern day Fir'aun come and say, kill them now before they become the terrorists of tomorrow. Allahu Akbar. And you find people believing this, collectively standing out against it. People justify that there is a reason. Yes, there's a reason to level a building just because you want to kill one guy or 10 guys or whatever, even if you kill 100 or 200 or 300 people in the process. A'udhu billah from such debased and lowly humanity. Right? Prophet ﷺ tells us many hadiths. I'm sure Shaykh Muhammad's going to share with us some of these hadiths too. Like one of these hadiths, the Prophet ﷺ tells us there will be deceitful years. Have we ever seen a time when liars and frauds were embraced to the fullest as genuine, as sincere, as people of freedom, democracy, and integrity? The great lie of democracy, right? It's been exposed, cat's out of the bag, everyone knows it. No more human rights. Don't lie to us about human rights, democracy, and all that other garbage that we've been hearing about for years. Now it's all clear. It's about agenda. It's about masalih. It's about self-interest. So the scary thing is, the Prophet ﷺ tells us, يُصَدَّقُ فِيهَا الْكَاذِبُ وَيُكَذَّبُ فِيهَا الصَّادِقُ. People who are utter liars will be embraced by the masses, and people who are true and genuine will be seen as liars. People who are treacherous will be embraced as umana, And the Prophet ﷺ tells us, and this again, there are so many things in our hadith tradition that tell us about signs. The Prophet ﷺ tells us that you will find that the hour won't come until people will find a difficulty finding someone who's ameen, someone who's trustworthy. It's going to be so difficult to find someone who's trustworthy, to the extent that people will say, "Inna fi bani fulan rajulun amin." You want someone trustworthy? Go to this city over there. There's a trustworthy person over there. You'll be able to deal with him. Tell me you cannot see the parallels that are in the Prophet ﷺ's words when we're dealing with our reality. When we're talking about business and trade, when we're talking about, certain services or certain dealings, people deal with this. They see this. The Prophet ﷺ gives us so much guidance on this, and the companions were very keen, as Shaykh Muhammad was saying, to learn this tradition about what will happen, what are the signs of the end of times. One of these companions, let's see if anyone knows it. Who's the companion who was most known for the hadith of fitan, the hadith of fitan? He would always ask the Prophet ﷺ about the fitan and about trials and tribulations. Who knows who that companion is? Who knows? طبعا, I know you know. Jazakallah khair. He's right. Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman. Sayyidina Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman, he says in the hadith, look, I'll share this hadith and I'll pass it back over to Shaykh Muhammad. كان الناس يسألون رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الخير وكنت أسأله عن الشر مخافة أن يدركني. Sayyidina Hudhayfa says, people would ask things about the Prophet about good things. And I'd ask him about all the harmful, evil things. Why? Because I was afraid of falling into them. And then فقلت يا رسول الله إن كنا في جاهلية وشر فجاءنا الله بهذا الخير فهل بعد هذا الخير من شر. So he asked the Prophet ﷺ, O Prophet of Allah, we were in jahiliyyah and ignorance. And then Allah blessed us with all this goodness of Islam. Is there going to be any wickedness and evil after all this goodness? فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نعم, there will be. And then he says, قلت وهل بعد ذلك الشر من خير. And after that wickedness comes, will there be goodness again? The Prophet ﷺ said, نعم وفيه دخن. قلت وما دخنه. قال قوم يهدون بغير هدي تعرف منهم وتنكر. Allah forgive us and protect us. Ya Allah, don't make us from them. The Prophet ﷺ said, yeah, there's going to come goodness. But with this goodness, there's going to be a lot of confusion. Because there will be those who will call and guide people, but not according to my guidance. You will see good things in them, but you'll also see wicked things in them. تعرف منهم وتنكر. قلت فهل بعد ذلك الخير من شر. Then he said, after that goodness, that's of a lesser level, not like the first generation, will there then be wickedness again? So then the Prophet ﷺ said to him, دعاة إلى أبواب جهنم من أجابهم إليها قذفوه فيها. قلت يا رسول الله صفهم لنا. Right? The Prophet, he said, there will be callers at the gates of hellfire. Whoever answers their call, they will lead him right to the gates of hell. So he asked the Prophet ﷺ, describe them to us. The Prophet ﷺ said, هم من جلدتنا ويتكلمون بألسنتنا. They are just like you. You will not be able to decipher them. It'll be very confusing. It'll be very confusing. They look like you and talk like you. فَمَا تَأْمُرُنِي إِنْ أَدْرَكَنِي ذَلِكَ. What do you command me to do? Pay attention to this, guys. It's one of the profound guidances of the Prophet ﷺ, how to deal with times of trial and tribulation, whether we're the end of time or not. So he said, what do you command me to do if I see that? So then the Prophet ﷺ told Sayyidina Hudhayfa, تَلْزَمُ جَمَاعَةَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَإِمَامَهُمْ. قلت فإن لم يكن لهم جماعة ولا إمام. He said, قال فاعتزل تلك الفرق كلها ولو أن تعض بأصل شجرة حتى يدركك الموت وأنت كذلك. Prophet ﷺ says, if that harm happens, make sure you stick closely to a good support system. Stick closely to the congregation of believers. Stick closely to a good leadership. If you see a good leader, follow that good leader. If you see someone to advise you and guide you to Allah and to the way of the Prophet ﷺ, stick closely to that. Don't let that go. Don't isolate. Right? So then he said, okay, well, I want to ask another question further. What if I don't find that? Then he said, if you don't find anyone, and by the way, we're not there yet. Alhamdulillah, we find there's a lot of goodness in the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ. There's a lot of khair. If you don't find anyone, then he said, be very careful. Don't engage. Disengage. And why is he saying this? We need to reflect on this point. Because again, there's a lot of misconceptions about the end of time. And one of these great misconceptions is the Prophet ﷺ tells us to run away from the problems of the world. Is that the lesson from Hadith al-Fitan wal-Malahim? No way. That's not the lesson from al-Fitan wal-Malahim. And speaking about the hadiths relating to trials and tribulations, run away from the problems of the world. That's not it. There's more to it. But that's this hadith of Sayyidina Hudhayfa. I'm going to pass it back over to Sayyidina Shaykh Muhammad to give us stuff.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. That part you mentioned about Luzum al-Jama'at al-Muslimin, staying with the Muslims or staying close to the congregation. A lot of people just jump to the last part, which is i'tizal, just isolating themselves. But they missed the point that Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu asked, what if there is no Jama'ah and there's no Imam? Not that you go, this is one option and this is another option. No. If there is no Jama'ah, there is no congregation of Muslims, there is no leader, then you go to that second option. And even when it comes to isolating yourselves, when do you isolate yourself? You isolate yourself when you don't know what the truth is. A lot of the companions during the time of fitna, when there's split between the Sahaba on certain things, Some of them abstained because it wasn't clear to them who was right and who was wrong. But then we also have some Sahaba who abstained, and then when things became clear for them, they went onto the side that they thought that was correct. So when we speak about i'tizal, when we speak about isolating oneself, there's no such thing in Islam as rahbaniyah. There's no monasticism in Islam. Islam has no monasticism. They would say about the Sahaba that they were fursan bin nahar, and they were monks. They were knights during the day, they were warriors during the day, and they were monks during the night. There was no divorce between the world and the world of worship and the world of action. You know, other religions, they have monks, they have temples, they have certain class of people that just stay away from the world. Islam never came with that, and that is never part of Islam. Islam came for you to be part of society, for you to make positive change. So this idea of luzum al-jama'ah, to think that everyone else is misguided and everyone else has got it wrong, and the majority of the Muslims in the world are all on deviance, and I just have to isolate myself. That's a completely wrong idea. The Prophet ﷺ, he used to say, or he said, من قال هلك الناس فهو أهلكهم وهو أهلكهم. You can say either one, and they both have different meanings. So if you say, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever says that the people are destroyed, then he is the most destroyed of them. Being away from pessimism. And if you say فَهُوَ أَهْلَكَهُمْ, then it means that whoever says that the people are destroyed, then he has destroyed them. Meaning what? He's spread pessimism to the point that he's the one who's put them into ruin. He's put them into destruction. So the Muslim never looks with this pessimistic view that there's, I need to completely isolate myself, I don't need to engage with society. No. But al-aks, we always see that the companions, they were people who engaged with society. The Prophet ﷺ, despite seeing the horrors of hellfire and knowing of the end of times, it never stopped him from engaging with his society. It never stopped him from continuing to spread the message. Right? If there's anyone who would have been, if there's any amount of sad news that can make someone depressed, the Prophet ﷺ contained all of those newses. Yet, that did not stop him from moving forward. So that's one point, just to kind of piggyback off of what Shaykh said. Another thing that the Shaykh mentions is that a time will come, يُصَدِّقُ فِيهَا الْكَاذِبُ وَيُكَذِّبُ فِيهَا الصَّادِقُ. That a time will come where the liar will be believed and the truthful one will be belied. Subhanallah, this is like what's happening now. The concept of gaslighting, that is gaslighting. Making someone think that what they're saying is completely outrageous, that they're completely on the wrong side. Like I spoke to people that when all the things that started to happen in Gaza, like a month in, 2 months in, they would read comments online and they would start questioning, am I right or am I wrong? Like, am I the one who's wrong? They would see all these bots and these, people commenting, and they would start thinking that maybe we're wrong on this. Maybe we are savages. Maybe we are barbarians. Maybe they start having these thoughts. And it just shows you what fitna does. It makes someone think, someone that's clearly on truth. Someone is just saying, give people water. Give people food. Don't kill children. That's all we're saying. And you're made to believe that you're the one that's wrong? Does it become any more clear that this is a time of fitna? يُخَوَّنُ فِيهَا, the Prophet said, يُؤْتَمَنُ فِيهَا الْخَائِنُ وَيُخَوَّنُ فِيهَا الْأَمِينُ. That in this time, the one who is a deceiver, he's trusted. And the one who is actually trustworthy is the one who's shown to be a deceiver. People make him a deceiver. And it brings full view of the hadith, and this is also about the end of times, where the Prophet says, يُصْبِحُ الرَّجُلُ مُؤْمِنًا وَيُمْسِي كَافِرًا وَيُمْسِي مُؤْمِنًا وَيُصْبِحُ كَافِرًا. That a person, a man, he wakes up in the morning a believer and he goes to sleep a disbeliever. And he reaches the night time a believer and he wakes up in the morning and he's a disbeliever. Why? Because these trials are so severe that a person in the process, they're losing their faith. Who are those who are losing their faith? Who've not fortified it. Who've not fortified it and put themselves in strong principles that allow them to be guided. You know, if you don't have guiding principles, if you don't have thawabit, which this deen gives us, that's what makes this deen so beautiful, is that you can go over a hadith like the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi, and you have the foundation guiding principles of your deen. Like these hadith, these statements of the Prophet ﷺ can guide you through your life. Which other religion has that? Which other religion can say that these are, you know, these are our principles and this is what we have and these are the guidances that we have and we can live through any time with this? So it tells us about the trying times that the end of times are. And as the Shaykh mentioned, all of the ideologies and the things that are coming, you know, we see it, like you clearly see it. A person he wakes up a Muslim, he sees a video on YouTube, and by the morning time he's an atheist. Subhanallah, subhanallah, like the accuracy of the Prophet's prophecies. Shaykh, you have anything else? Yeah.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. You know, one of the scariest things that alarms me about today is, it's as though leaders of the quote-unquote progressed world, I'm going to keep on referring to it like that, as the progressed world, have lost their minds, literally. I don't know, more of a sign that could be so evident to us of how there's a rise of ignorance. People in positions, how has human civilization, with all of its knowledge and intelligence and universities and academics and all of the work that human beings are doing, human ingenuity, how have we been reduced to the point where our leaders have convinced us that the more we bomb them, the more things will get better? It doesn't make any sense. This is like Fir'auni logic 101, right? I'm gonna suppress my detractors. I'm gonna silence them. I am going to bomb them to smithereens, and they're eventually going to give up. How? How have we let lunatics in positions of power run wild with the missiles they have, the bombs they have? It's so scary. Prophet ﷺ also tells us that this will happen in the end of times. Prophet ﷺ tells us that you will find someone who is a ruwaybida, who will be able to address public discourse. What is a ruwaybida? Prophet ﷺ says, الرجل التافه الذي يتكلم في أمر العامة. This will be an insignificant person who will be able to take hold of public discourse, right? How? I think with everything that's happened, the connection between leadership and followers has been severed to the point where I'm not sure if trust could be really regained in the system, unless the system completely is revamped and re-envisioned. Politics now, everyone knows, everyone with any sensibility has become the musing of the morally bankrupt. Anyone who's morally bankrupt will excel in politics. They'll get into high positions. Anyone who's willing to sell themselves out, right, to certain entities and certain lobbies, and I'm not saying this for us to take a strong stance against politics. Now, I know that politics is part of our life and it's a system that we need to engage with. That's not why I'm saying that. But I'm saying that to be real, everyone sees it. It's reality. It's reality that has been diluted to the point where it's all about your false allegiances and it's nothing about it is about truth, right? So, that logic never worked in the past, where you're just going to continue to suppress and, you're going to silence people with bombs. That never worked, right? So there's a lot of other hadiths that tell us how to operate. All right, if I'm a Muslim and I realize this and I know this, all right, what should I do now? We heard some things about sticking to congregation, about approaching it in a very proactive way, right? How should I navigate these torrential waters with wisdom and guidance? One of the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, and there's a lot of hadiths where the Prophet gives Abu Dharr advice One of these hadiths is, يا أبا ذر كيف أنت إذا كانت عليك أمراء يؤخرون الصلاة عن وقتها. قلت, so the Prophet ﷺ asked him this question, what will you do, Abu Dhar, if you have leaders who will begin delaying salah from its proper time? So then Sayyidina Abu Dhar asked the Prophet ﷺ, فَمَا تَأْمُرُنِي? What do you tell me to do? So then the Prophet ﷺ told Sayyidina Abu Dhar, صَلِّ الصَّلَاةَ لِوَقْتِهَا فَإِنْ أَدْرَكْتَهَا مَعَهُمْ فَصَلِّ فَإِنَّهَا لَكَ نَافِلَةٌ. Prophet ﷺ tells Abu Dhar, hey look, don't be quick to create fitna and strife. That's why wisdom, we learn from the Prophet ﷺ's life in his da'wah that each of the stages that he was in needed a certain mindset and approach. So Prophet ﷺ told Abu Dhar, pray salah on time, don't delay salah. Never disobey Allah in who you choose to follow. Follow the truth. But at the same time, he said, if you also pray it with them, then pray it again. Avoid fitna, in other words. Don't cause noise and controversy. And what's the lesson I get from this? Right now, we're in very confusing times, and part of this confusion is the different sects, the different groups, right? The Prophet ﷺ says, hey, watch your tongue. Be very careful. In times of fitna, don't be an active participant in any wrongdoing. There are certain things I know and there are certain things I don't know. And I should know my boundaries and my limitations. Do I know the ins and outs of what's happening around the world and who's who and what's what? I don't. And how should I approach that with a prophetic attitude? I'm just going to stick to what I do know. And I'm going to leave what I don't know to whoever Allah Azza wa Jal has given access. I don't need to address every problem in the world. I don't need to make it as though I have everything figured out. I don't need to do that. What I can do is stick to what's clear and evident and avoid anything that's controversial. I think that's one of the prophetic lessons in navigating times of fitna. There's another hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ tells us, hey, look, there are certain characteristics that have become dominant in the time, in society, in the end of times. يَتَقَارَبِ الزَّمَانِ يُقْبَضُ الْعِلْمِ تظهر الفتن يلقى الشح ويكثر الهرج. We mentioned the harj in another hadith. Prophet ﷺ says, you will not, in those times you'll find that there's little barakah in time, little blessings in time. Time will feel as though it's shorter. Knowledge will decrease and diminish. Fitan and conflicts and strife will be so dominant. And then you'll find people very, very stingy in their nafsiyah. They won't be generous. They won't be kind to each other. They won't be embracing of one another. There'll be a sense of shuh. Everyone will stick to their beliefs and their convictions, right? Yulqa shuh wa yakthur al-harj. And that's fitna, as we said. The Prophet ﷺ tells us that in this hadith. There is one question I want to infuse here, Shaykh Muhammad, that we got from the audience. And I encourage you guys, send us your stuff. Send us your questions, and we'll try to address it as best as we can. First, one of the things we got, can we please include our brothers and sisters in Sudan in our dua? Answer is absolutely. We need to include our brothers and sisters. May Allah Azza wa Jal give faraj and ease to our brothers and sisters in Sudan. May Allah Azza wa Jal give them healing. There's a lot of bloodshed and brutality that's happened there and is happening there. And it's not spoken about enough, unfortunately. It's not spoken about enough, and we need to do better in making dua for our brothers and sisters in Sudan. There are so many problems that are facing the Muslims across the world, that it's the emotional wounds. Sometimes it's difficult to account for everybody, but we need to do better. There's another question that came here, and I want to see what you think about it, Shaykh, is what to do when your heart feels so heavy. How do you stop feeling guilty with everything you see happening around the world in the news? So I don't know if you have something to say to that, and of course, add for us some of the points you have. But I think that's an important reflection point, Shaykh. I don't know if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that we all have, right? Every one of us, when we're seeing these images coming out and we feel so helpless, right? What can we do? The first thing is that the fact that your heart is hurting and that your heart is heavy is a good sign. Because you're embodying the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the Muslims are like one body. When when a part of the body has an infection, then the whole body, if a limb has an infection, then the whole body is up in fever that night. The Prophet tells us this, that they're like one building. So the fact that you're feeling that, the fact that you're going through that hardship or that anxiety or that stress or that sadness, that's a good sign that you're still connected to the ummah and that you still care about the pains of the ummah. In terms of what we can do, there's always something we can do, and for us, for what we can do here is going to be different than what someone, for example, in Jordan can do, or what someone in Egypt can do, or what someone in Gaza can do. So every person is going to be asked according to what they can do. What can we do? For sure, we can make dua, and we should never underestimate dua and say that we've been making dua for 1 year, we made dua in Ramadan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers on His time, it's not on our time. So your dua itself is ibadah. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us that al-ibadatu fil haraji kal-hijrati ilay. That ibadah, worship in the time of haraj, in this time of massive bloodshed and fitan, is like making hijrah to the Prophet ﷺ. That's a huge reward. Making hijrah to the Prophet ﷺ is a huge reward. Why is it that ibadah in this time is like hijrah to the Prophet ﷺ? Because everyone else is not doing ibadah. Everyone else is so consumed in the means, like what protest can I go to? What can I do? And you should do all those things. Go to your protest, call the representatives, donate money. All those things you should be doing those. But sometimes we get so caught up in the means that we forget about the source. When we say la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, that there is no change in state and there is no power except in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We truly have to believe that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tomorrow wants to change the affairs of the world and turn everything on its head, He can do that. So, al-ibadatu fil haraji ka hijrati ilay. That, don't forget that main point, that to solidify your heart with ibadah, to make your heart stronger with ibadah, to make dua, and to increase your acts of worship. Yes, you do all those activism, all the things that you need to do materialistically to help our brothers and sisters, but that ibadah has not only a spiritual uplifting and a fortifications against fitan, but it also has a healing to it. It has a healing to it. So when you sit there and you call out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you're connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you're asking Him, then that does heal you and that does fortify you. And that actually makes your heart strong against the fitan. Because if you have that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the fitan come, you're not swayed by them because you're ready to receive them. When you look at the Quran, like we mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about as-sa'a, constantly speaks about the sa'a, the last hour. And then He only alludes to the signs. Why? Because if someone truly embodies everything in the Quran and fortifies their heart, then when the fitan come, they'll be able to face them. Now, so that's one thing I say is ibadah.
Shaykh, since you're mentioning the point, someone's asking, can you mention the hadith of the fasila and how can we remain hopeful as an ummah?
Yeah, so I was going to use that. I was going to say that at the end, but if they're asking for it, we'll say it now. When it comes to just let me finish this point. So one thing is you do your ibadah, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you do whatever is within your capacity materialistically, which is donating, which is being active in the community, sharing the information. SubhanAllah, a lot of the times we undermine social media. We undermine the Gen Z, and we said they're all just stuck on their phones. But SubhanAllah, they changed the tides of the narrative, and it showed. So if whatever means you have, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you with, whatever you're capable of, materialistically, you do those things, and you also fortify your heart with ibadah, and that's all you could do. La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not burden a soul with more than it can bear. And so with that, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate that sadness, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be of aid to our brothers and sisters and be from their munasirin. The hadith of the fasila is a beautiful hadith. It's one of the most beautiful hadith. I love that hadith. It's the hadith of the sprout. In there, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, إذا قامت الساعة وفي أحدكم في يد أحدكم فسيلة فإن استطاع ألا تقوم حتى يغرسها فليغرسها. That if the end of time comes, if that last hour comes, and one of you has a sprout in his hand, and he can plant it before the hour is established, then let him plant it. Like the smallest amount of good, the hour is about to come. But the problem I'm saying is that even if the hour is about to come, put that sprout in. Because at that moment, that's all you can do. The only good thing you can do at that moment is to put that sprout in. And the beautiful thing about that is that when the hour is established, because the hour is about to be established, are you ever going to see the fruits of that tree? Will you ever see that tree grow and become like a huge, beautiful tree and the fruits, and then you eat from those fruits? It tells us what? That the results are not in your hand. And you are not responsible for the results. You're not responsible. Never are you responsible for the results. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never endows us with the results. He only asks us for actions. So your job is, what can you do right now? Because at every moment there is a wajib. There's a wajib of the waqt. Every moment. At every moment of your life, there is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you at that moment. And you need to stand up and do that action. And one of the hadith that I wanted to share, Shaykh, is a hadith in Riyadh al-Salihin that you're going over. In Sunan al-Tirmidhi, where the Prophet says, بادروا بالأعمال سبعة. بادروا بالأعمال سبعة. Hasten to good deeds before these 7. هل تنتظرون فقرا منسيا أو غنى مطغيا أو مرضا مفسدا أو هرما مفندا أو موتا مجهزا أو الدجال وشر غائب ينتظر أو الساعة والساعة أدهى وأمر. The Prophet ﷺ here, he says, hasten towards good deeds before 7. Are you waiting for, the Prophet says, are you waiting for poverty that makes you forget? When you're poor and you're just worried about making money so that you can eat and you can feed your family, when are you going to do good deeds? When are good deeds going to be on your mind if you're just worrying about paying your rent and getting enough food for your house? So the Prophet said, are you waiting for poverty that's going to make you forget? أو غنى مطغية, or richness that makes you corrupt. Richness that makes you transgress. It happens to so many people. They say that once I become religious, or once I get enough money, I'll become religious. Once I have enough money, I'll start focusing on the deen. What happens after they get money? More money, more problems. They become corrupt. They become busy. And then the Prophet says, أو مرضا مفسدا. مرضا مفسدا. Or are you waiting for a sickness that destroys your body, that makes you weak? Or are you waiting for haraman mufnida or mufannida? Or are you waiting for senile age that makes you forget and makes you lose your mental capacity? Or are you waiting for death that comes unannounced and fast? And then the Prophet says, and are you waiting for Dajjal? Are you waiting for Dajjal? And what a horrible thing to wait for. And then the Prophet said, أو الساعة, or are you waiting for the final hour? وَالسَّاعَةُ أَدْهَى وَأَمَرْ. The sa'a, the last hour, is grievous and bitter. So here, like when you think about the end of times, every sign is a wake-up call from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I remember sitting here, Shaykh Osamah was giving the khutbah on the earthquake that happened in Ramadan. That was a sign. Like that was just a few months ago. Every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a sign, it's the alarm clock going up. Wake up. Wake up. The Prophet was telling us, when are you going to wake up? Are you going to wake up when you become poor? Are you going to wake up? You're waiting to wake up when you become rich? You're waiting to wake up when you become old? Or and then it comes to the end, the last hour. Are you waiting for the last hour? Because at that point, there's no more. You keep pressing snooze. You know, all of us have pressed snooze a little too many times and overslept. What's that feeling you get? You know when you wake up and you know you press snooze too much? You get that sinking feeling in your gut, like, khalas, like I messed up today. You wake up and you're like rushing to the bathroom. You don't even have time for breakfast. You're thinking about what are you going to tell your boss, and what are you going to tell your workmates, and what's the excuse you're going to say? Like that feeling of anxiety and stress, and that heaviness in your stomach. Can you imagine that on a greater scale for the Day of Judgment? Can you imagine the hour coming and you haven't prepared? So the fasila, the hadith of the fasila, it just reminds us that hasten towards act, regardless of how little that act may be, or how much you're able to do, or what's in your capacity. Do whatever you can, because that laying that sprout into the ground is inconsequential. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to stop the sarah. It's not going to make anything better. You're not going to see that fruit, but you still have to do the actions. That's what we learned from Hadith Fasila.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. Allah yabarak feek. I just want to zoom out again and just make sure that we're all it's registering, the critical prophetic guidance about end of times. So one thing that we learned that's so critical is our relationships. I need a good support system around me. I need to surround myself with good advisors. I need to make sure that I'm part of the jama'ah. That's one thing that we said. The other thing that it was alluded to and it was stated that one of the features of the end of time is there'll be a lot of misinformation, there'll be a lot of confusion, right? إن بين يدي الساعة لأياما ينزل فيها الجهل ويرفع فيها العلم. Prophet ﷺ says, ignorance will come down, knowledge and understanding will rise up. It'll be limited in the lives of people. So what does that mean? How does it get to the point, Shaykh, when someone would wake up as a believer and by nightfall he's a disbeliever? How does it get to the point that by nightfall he's a believer and then he wakes up as a disbeliever? How could there possibly be so much confusion that a person would literally change his deen and belief in that short of a time? Prophet ﷺ says, يَبِيعُ دِينَهُ بِعَرَضٍ مِنَ الدُّنْيا. People will sell themselves out. What have certain realities in our time contributed? How have certain realities in our time contributed to misinformation? Social media and everything relating to social media and all the confusion that, has creeped into the hearts and minds of people because of social media. There's a lot to say about that. But if I realize that one of the features of the end of times is there'll be a lot of confusion and misdirection, that means I need to fortify my mind. For me, it would just be so inexcusable for me to see everything happening in the world the way it's happening today and me not invest the time in building my own self-awareness. Imagine like if and of course we all have our growth curves, right? So, but if you came to the masjid tonight and you've spent very little time invested in the past few days and figuring out what's happening around the world, that means I need to adjust my priorities. I need to invest more time in self-awareness. I need to be aware of what's happening in the world today, right? Again, I shared this in the khutbah today. Just one image struck me. I can't get it out of my head. I saw this video, and that's one of the benefits that we have from social media. But I saw this video, a swarm of people, around these big pots of rice. Someone with these like big spoons, right? Pouring it into to these smaller pots. Rice! I'm not talking about people fighting over money or people fighting over meat or chicken or mash'arif. No. Rice! And everyone just has their small pot hoping to get a spoonful of rice so they don't starve to death. And then someone commented on the video, Allahumma jawwa' man jawwa' ahl Gaza. And I said, Allahumma ameen. Oh, may Allah give starvation to the one who has caused starvation to the people of Gaza. It's a sad thing to see. So self-awareness is critical right now. I need to be aware. How can I see everything happen in the world and I still allow myself to remain with very limited knowledge and understanding of my deen? Right? It's not appropriate. I've seen signs in the people of Gaza. This is the second thing. So the third point, right? So I need to look at my relationships, my connection to the greater body of believers. I need to look at my mind and self-awareness. That's a critical factor in navigating fitan. And the third thing, I need to fortify my soul. You think the people of Gaza would have been able to have the response they had they been bankrupt spiritually? Wallahi no. That's there's a lot of conflicts and a lot of tragedies that have happened in our time. Like I said, in the east and west and all pockets and everywhere else. Why this struggle stood out so uniquely in the minds and hearts of people? Why did it influence so many people? This should teach us something. We need to fortify our souls. If I'm going through a lot of stuff in my personal life, like one of the questions I got here is this. It's the top voted question. How do you stop feeling guilty for the sins you've committed? Every time I try to better myself, I can't stop thinking about it. Good. Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless you and bless us all. We all make mistakes. That feeling of guilt is coveted. It's something that I need. I need to feel guilty. All of this directs me. You know what? All the problems I'm going through, the solution to them by Allah and by Allah's guidance is in my hand. If Allah Azza wa Jal guides me, they're in my hand. I just need to take the steps. I need to fortify I need to build tawakkul in my heart. I need to really focus on the spiritual path. These are proactive things. When fitan come, brothers and sisters, anyone who's not grounded in their iman will be swayed. I want you to think about something. Dajjal. When he comes, what should we recite to Dajjal if you meet the Dajjal? Hope we never meet him, Ya Allah. Right? What should you recite upon the Dajjal? Surah Al-Kahf, some hadith say the first verses of Surah Fawatih, Surah Al-Kahf. And other verses say the end of Surah Al-Kahf. Did you ever think for a moment, maybe I should reflect on these verses and how they relate to Dajjal? Think about them. Go read the verses in the beginning and end of Surah Al-Kahf. The Dajjal and everything that he represents and symbolizes. Why will those verses protect the person? Was it like it's a magical thing? No, we don't. Of course not. There's a meaning there, right? إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا. This dunya is a zina. وَإِنَّا لَجَاعِلُونَ مَا عَلَيْهَا صَعِيدًا جُرُزًا. No matter what any person has of this dunya, it's all gone. Even if they're someone who comes with a lot of things that just, puzzle our minds or, trigger our interest and our intrigue. All of it's gone. Everything will become barren land one day. And the other thing, the end of the verses of Surah Al-Kahf, it tells us about not being deceived, right? Well, who's that person who's going to be deceived, right? This is a scary verse. It reminds us of how to navigate fitan. How do I become someone, how can I be someone who's not deceived? Allah Azza wa Jal says in the end of Surah Al-Kahf, قُلْ هَلْ أُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِالْأَخْسَرِينَ أَعْمَالًا. You know what? You want to know who the true loser is? The one who's lost his way in his dunya. And he thinks that he's a person of excellence and goodness. I guarantee you, there are people in the Israeli army who think that they're doing the right thing. I guarantee you. Even though people of conscience in the East and West, Muslim and non-Muslim, they all see it. But I guarantee you there are people who think they're fighting the forces of evil. They think that when they're bombing children to smithereens and leveling Gaza, they are fulfilling the promise of the Torah, right? That's what they think they're doing. They're hastening the coming of the Messiah, who's their Dajjal, right? But brothers and sisters, the verses of Surah Al-Kahf give us direction not to be deceived. My mind needs to be in the right place. My heart needs to be in the right place too. And I need to be surrounded with goodness. Allah Alam. Tafadal Shaykh.
Yeah, Shaykh. That's I don't really have much to add to that, but just going off of what you said about the people of Gaza, just I think a couple of months before everything started, they had like thousands of hufaz that they graduated, like in the thousands. And I was just seeing maybe like a month ago or a couple of weeks ago, despite all of it, like a genocide that's been going on for a year, you had still halaqat of Quran where people were doing khatamat of the Quran in one sitting in jalsa wahida in the Quran. I mean in the masajid. Like it just shows you where they were spiritually. For like we're amazed at the iman of the people of Gaza. But we don't see all the work that they may have put in for the years and years that led up to this. And we know that the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says that the most tested people are the prophets and those closest to them. So when you see their response, that response only comes from, like the Shaykh said, hearts that are fortified, hearts that we're spending time with the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's so important for us with our ibadah also to make sure that we don't lose track of our relationship to the Quran. Because when you open up the Quran, you'll see these stories are constantly repeating themselves. Fir'aun, the story of Fir'aun, we're seeing it in front of our eyes. The story of Al-Ahzab. Like the parallels between the Ahzab and what's going on in Gaza is mind-boggling. The group of believers were surrounded from every side. And the only thing they could do is go down, dig down. And then on top of that, you had the Prophet ﷺ, and this shows you something. One of the most darkest points in the seerah was Battle of Ahzab. 10,000 people had gathered to destroy the Muslims. We hear 10,000, we think that 10,000 is not a lot. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Arabian Peninsula had not seen an army of Arabs that were 10,000 strong. You know, the people, tribes used to be maybe tens, hundreds of people. Like a big tribe would be 1,000, 2,000 people. Ghatafan was one of the biggest tribes. They all came together, just like all the superpowers of the world today are getting together to destroy these small band of believers. Like that, when you make those parallels, it's mind-boggling. And then in the midst of this dark moment, and this shows you why we need to be optimistic. In the midst of this dark moment, the Prophet ﷺ is digging the trench. They come across this huge boulder. They can't break it. They say, call the Prophet ﷺ. He comes and he strikes it. He strikes the boulder. He says, Allahu Akbar. He strikes the boulder. It sparks. And he says, I have been given the keys of Sham, of Lebanon, Palestine, Syria. And then he strikes it again. And he said, I have been given the keys of Kisra, of Persia. And then he strikes it again and he says, I have been given the keys of Yemen. You're about to be destroyed by one of the biggest armies that have come. And here the Prophet ﷺ is giving glad tidings of where this ummah will go. And then you had two people at that moment. You had those who had no faith. They were hypocrites. مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. They said the Prophet was delusional. One of us cannot even use the bathroom in safety, and he's telling us that we're going to get the keys of Persia and the keys of Yemen and the keys of Sham. And then another group of people, the believers, what did they say? That there's no way we can be destroyed here. Because if Persia is left, if Sham is left, if Yemen is left, there's no way that we are going to be destroyed here. And they say, Sadaqallahu wa rasuluhu. Right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger have spoken the truth. So they saw the same realities. But because one heart had faith, that heart was able to see the truth for what it was. And there were hearts that didn't have faith, that were filled with hypocrisy, that were not fortified. So what did they see? They only saw pessimism. They only saw destruction. So it's very important, like the Shaykh said, to fortify your heart. And a lot of the times we think that we're just going to, ride the bus. Like I always like to give this example, is that we take our deen a lot of the times like a bus ride. Like we sit on the bus at point A, and we just enjoy the ride until it gets to point B. And we think that life is just going to be like this. Like I'm going to sit, I'm going to do whatever I can from the deen, and then at the end of it, inshallah, everything's going to be okay. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. You have to put in the work. You have to actually do mujahada. You actually have to force yourself to do the work so that you can reap the benefits of that work. You know, the scholars, they say, the one whose beginnings does not have mujahada, then his endings don't have enlightenment. That if your beginnings, you don't struggle in the beginning, then in the end you're not going to benefit from all of that struggle that you put in. So how can we benefit from the certainty that we see in the people of Gaza? Is by building that certainty with knowledge and with action. There has to be action. There's no way that you're going to just gain knowledge and not couple that with action. And there's no way that you're just going to have action and you're not going to couple that with knowledge.
There's a question here, and by the way, next thing I'm going to ask is if anyone has a direct question they'd like to ask, so you could prepare it if you have one. There's a question here. Let's see what you think about it, Shaykh. I don't want to be alive when the end is near. Is it okay to make dua that this isn't the end of times? How would I address this question? First off, there is one of the hadiths that tell us about the end of times. It says this, that things will be so intense on people that the person will pass by a grave and they'll wish to be instead of the person in this grave. Now, of course, it's not condoning this thought process, but the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to this reality where life will be so difficult that people would be wished to be in the grave instead of the person in it. That's how scary things could get. Now, about wishing for death, that's something that we should be very careful with. The Prophet ﷺ tells us, hey, look, don't wish for death. But he says, لا يتمنين أحدكم الموت لضر أصابه. None of you should wish for death if it's due to some affliction that's befallen you. But rather say, oh Allah, give me life as long as life is good for me. And give me death if death is what's good for me. So that's what I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Shaykh.
That's basically what I would have said. Yeah, you make dua, you making dua that, making dua that this is not the end of times is not going to change the trajectory that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already decreed. These things have already been decreed. Your dua is not going to change whether it is the end of times or not. But you can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you thabat, to give you steadfastness if it is, and to keep you for as long as, like the Shaykh said, the dua of the Prophet ﷺ that he taught, that you make dua that, oh Allah, keep me alive for as long as life is good for me. And if death is better for me, then give me death. And the hadith that the Shaykh mentioned about people who wish that a man will pass by a grave and he will wish that would be the one who's in there. That will be because of, as the Shaykh mentioned, that because it will be so difficult. But also because the believer, he will be so tested in his faith that he would rather be dead than be tested in his faith. Because the tests are so severe that he fears he may lose his faith. And so he said that he would wish that he was dead so that he does not have to go to that test and lose his faith. To show you how important it is to safeguard your faith at that moment, at that time.
I have a question for you guys before I see if anyone has a question for us. The question I have for you guys is, what do you guys think is the biggest struggle of the ummah today? If someone asks you that question, what's the ummah's biggest struggle today? What would you say? We have one person here. Unifying. So what the biggest struggle, why do you say that's the biggest struggle? Why is it the biggest struggle? All right, you're saying you're looking, just to repeat what he's saying, looking at what's happening in the Muslim world today, what's happening in Gaza wouldn't be happening the way it was if Muslims got together and took a strong stance against it. Okay, Jazakallah khair. Who else has a response to this question? The ummah's biggest struggle. Go ahead. So the nafs, you said, because everything that the world teaches us is okay, ends up blinding our outlook and perspective on things. Okay, so that's an interesting response. Does anyone have something else that they'd like to share? The ummah's biggest struggle? Go ahead. Social media is the biggest struggle for the ummah today. Good job, Habibi. Allah ikrimak ya Rabb. Hajj, you want to say something? So the shallow minds.
The West is working very, very hard to accomplish this mission. And unfortunately, they are succeeding somehow.
So in shallow minds, you said the West is working very hard on dissuading or influencing the perspectives of people on things. And to some extent, they're succeeding in that. Jazakallah khair, Hajj. Allah ikrimak ya Rabb. Does anyone have something they'd like to share here before I give you my response? Go ahead. We are? The biggest struggle today is the bad leadership of the Muslim world. Okay. Jazakallah khair. So look, a lot of everything what you guys said, all dances around something the Prophet ﷺ said. Remember this, the Prophet ﷺ made dua for the ummah for three things. The hadith tells us the Prophet ﷺ made dua for the ummah for three things. One of these things is that أَلَّا يُهْلِكَهُمْ بِسَنَةٍ عَامَّةٍ, that Allah doesn't destroy them because of some big calamity. Like Ad and Thamud were destroyed, and the nations before were destroyed. The Prophet made dua that his ummah not be destroyed by Allah's wrath being inflicted on them and obliterating them. This is one thing the Prophet ﷺ made dua. The second thing the Prophet ﷺ made dua was أَلَّا يُسَلِّطَ عَلَيْهِمْ عَدُوًّا مِنْ سِوَى أَنفُسِهِمْ فَيَسْتَبِيحُ بَيْضَتَهُمْ, that Allah Azza wa Jal not give ultimate power to an external force that'll subjugate the ummah and destroy the ummah, end Islam. And the third thing was the Prophet ﷺ made dua that Allah not make conflict and dissension intense between the members of the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ. The first two were granted. The third one is the struggle that the ummah faces today. The Prophet ﷺ said that Allah told him, وَلَوْ اجْتَمَعَ عَلَيْهِمْ مَنْ بِأَقْطَارِهَا, if everyone in the world was to gather against the ummah, they will not bring the end of the ummah. I believe this. I believe that ultimately, الْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, the downfall of oppression will happen eventually, even if it leads to the deaths of hundreds of thousands or millions of people. I believe that our greatest struggle today is not the struggle with an external force, as all of you said. It's a struggle for us to find our identity as an ummah. Who am I supposed to be? Look, the lesson from all of this is, look, if I'm hyper fixated on me, myself and I, and my own pursuits, my house, my car, my business, my degree, my family, my keda, my, then there's no way that I'm going to own up to my identity as a member of this ummah. That's the big lesson. A lot of the things that Shaykh Muhammad was saying, and we were saying throughout, all goes back to this point. I need to be activated. I need to wake up. If my biggest struggle as a member of the ummah is realizing my identity that Muhammad ﷺ laid forth, then you know what? I think real change will come about once we embrace that identity of speaking truth to power, that identity of being one collective body, that identity of being a people of goodness and service and khidmah, having a good support system, the idea of justice and the concept of justice and implementing justice, right? These are all critical things. Yeah, a lot of the things that you guys said, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy to see people, nations surrounding Gaza actively take steps to make sure the oppression in Gaza continues. It's a tragedy. Wallah, it's a tragedy to see that. May Allah Azza wa Jal better the situation. Does anyone have any direct question they'd like to ask? We're coming to an end. I'll take a direct question, and then we'll have final words with Shaykh Muhammad, inshallah. Go ahead, ask your question.
So the brother's asking is, if we are to fight or stick with the congregation or stick with good company, and the one deciding what good company is our own moral compass. If that moral compass is tainted, then how can we know if that is good company? So brother's asking, is that too pessimistic, or is that something we should be concerned about? I think one thing is that when the Prophet ﷺ, one of the companions, he came to him and he said to him, this is one of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, by the way. The companion, he came And before he even asked the question, the Prophet ﷺ said, جئت تسأل عن البر. You came to ask about what is al-bir. Before he even asked, the Prophet ﷺ knew what he was going to ask about. So he said yes. And then the Prophet ﷺ tells him then, استفتي قلبك. استفتي قلبك. Seek your heart, ask your heart, seek fatwa from your heart. Ask your heart, what is al-bir? And that tells us something, that our hearts, to a great extent, know what's good and what's bad. There's always gray matters, there's always things that we're not going to be able to tell. But on a very basic level, what's good and what's bad, it's pretty clear to us. You know, we don't have to run around we don't really have to look too far to understand what's good and what's bad. Same thing in the hadith where the Prophet says, قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ اسْتَقِمْ. Say, I believe in Allah, then be upright. It's as if the Prophet ﷺ is telling you, you already know how to be upright. ثُمَّ اسْتَقِمْ, like right away, right after you believe, be upright. How do we be upright? The Prophet ﷺ saying it in that way almost gives you the understanding that you know what's right and wrong. You may not know the details, but you know what's right and wrong. So I think when it comes to finding the good congregation or a good group of believers or good companionship, you'll be able to tell who are the people who are bringing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are reminding you about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in whose company am I getting farther from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When I sit with these people, I actually backbite. When I sit with these people, I'm talking about the dunya, I'm talking about things that are haram, things that don't concern me. That's very clear to us. So these people, we shouldn't be hanging out with them. And when you hang out with certain people that uplift you in your deen, you know that this is good companionship. But that's just on a level of, your friends. But when it comes to the jama'ah is much bigger. I mean, jama'ah is the body of the Muslims, That's the greater community, not just ICPC. We're talking about the Muslims in general. So it's very, the fact that everyone else is going to get it wrong and you're going to be the only one that's got it right is very unlikely. That all of the mashayikh and all the ulama in the country are going to be wrong on this issue. That's very unlikely. So the jama'ah is one thing, and the suhbah, righteous companionship, is something else.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. If I may add one thing, the safeguard that you have for that is becoming more acquainted and familiar with the example of the Prophet ﷺ. The more familiar we are with his seerah and his example, the better we'll be able to decipher good leadership, good mentorship, good guidance from false ones. That's the best litmus test. Wallahu alam. Is there anyone else who wanted to ask a direct question before we close? Go ahead. I know of a hadith, so the question is that she heard that there's a hadith that says Gaza will play a big role in the end of times. The hadith I know, the Prophet ﷺ says, وَإِنَّ أَفْضَلَ رِبَاطِكُمْ بِعَسْقَلَانِ. The Prophet ﷺ says that the ummah will have examples of resilience. And the best example of resilience throughout time will be the ribat and resilience of the people of Asqalan. Where's Asqalan? Right at the doors of Gaza, right? Asqalan is right next to Gaza. So subhanAllah, this is one of the things the Prophet ﷺ said. The other hadith that speaks about Bayt al-Maqdis and Aknaf Bayt al-Maqdis in general, the Prophet ﷺ says that there will continue لا تزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين على الحق لا يضرهم من خذلهم. There will be a group of my ummah that will remain upon truth. They will not be dissuaded by those who abandon them. They will not be harmed by those who abandon them. حتى يأتي أمر الله وهم ظاهرين على الناس. Allah's decree will come and they will still have this upper hand of truth in the way in their dealings with people. So, and the hadith, other narrations of the hadith say that these people are in Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem, and the surrounding areas of Jerusalem. Wallahu a'lam. Shaykh Muhammad, you have any last words?
I just wanted to add,
parting
Shaykh,
advice.
Basically, everything that you mentioned was beautiful. Jazakallah khairan. And I think the point that you mentioned in the beginning about how everything that's happening you are sure that you have great certainty that there's going to be change in the world. I think we should all be telling ourselves that, and we should proactively be part of that change, every single one of us. Just last year or 2 years ago, who from us was talking about Palestine or Al-Qadiyya al-Falastiniya or freeing Al-Aqsa or Gaza? Many of us had forgotten about it. Many people were guilty of completely forgetting about the Palestinian cause or of Al-Aqsa or Gaza in general. And subhanAllah, this brought everything to the forefront. And when we speak about, a lot of the times when everything started, we were always asking, where are the leaders? Where is the Salahuddin of our time? But we always forget that Salahuddin didn't go and free Al-Aqsa by himself. He had a whole nation and an army of scholars and righteous people who up until that point didn't forget about Al-Aqsa. The years that were coming up to Salahuddin, rahimahullah, regaining or retaking Al-Aqsa, there was a revival of knowledge. There was a revival. People were writing poems about freeing Al-Aqsa. There was this environment of Al-Aqsa will come back to us. So, Allahu A'lam, Allah knows best if we'll see it in our lifetimes. But we should put that in our children's head. For many of us, we're young. Some of us are married. Some of us are going to get married soon. Some of us already have children. That should be at the forefront of our children's mind. That if we don't get to it, this is the project that you need to take onto yourself. And you need to be that change that comes, inshallah. So that would be my parting advice is don't see this, the qadiyya of the ummah as you're this one person who cannot make a change. Collectively, if we're all changing and all of us are changing our environment, then there will be a huge change that comes that cannot be stopped by anybody or anything. Shaykh, I wanted to add this point about the alamat as-sa'a. A lot of times people fall into this conspiracies. They start reading the hadith and they start saying that this is our time, and then they don't. It freezes them. It paralyzes them. Like, can I do anything or should I do anything? There are scholars. They say whenever you read these hadith, they should be warning signs, but don't ever apply them and start saying that this is the time and this is what it is. Don't be so sure about it, because that can have very, very grave effects on the way you act and what happens. And one of the biggest signs of that is when the Mongols invaded the Muslim lands. The Mongolians, who came and decimated the Muslim lands. They went into cities and they razed them to the ground. They turned the masajid into, for lack of a better word, clubs. They would bring dancers in and alcohol, and they were drinking. This is in Samarkand and Bukhara and different places in Baghdad. They completely destroyed the library of Baghdad. They say there's knowledge that was in that library that was never recovered. So they completely decimated the Muslim lands. Guess what a lot of the people thought when the Mongolians came? Who do you think they thought they were? Ya'juj and Ma'juj. A lot of people at that time, this is on the 700s of Hijri, or before that, they thought that this was Ya'juj, these were Ya'juj and Ma'juj. And if this is Ya'juj and Ma'juj, then there's no point of fighting them. There's no point of putting up a resistance or fighting or struggling. And there's stories of villagers who lined up and just waited to be slaughtered during this time. Why? Because of the misapplication. They thought that this is where Ya'juj and Ma'juj, this is the end of times, we have nothing to do. And a lot of the scholars, they even started writing books about the end of times. Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya was written during this time. Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, wrote Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, which is, literally Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya means the beginning and the end. He wrote everything from the beginning of time to what is coming to the end. Because this was kind of like a general vibe that started in that time. So it's very important that when we read these ahadith, that we keep that mindset, that we don't start applying them and we start going into these conspiracies.
MashaAllah, that's beautiful. Jazakallah khair, Shaykh Muhammad. It's been an honor and delight to have you.
The honor is mine.
May Allah Azza wa Jal better the condition of the ummah and use us for goodness always. Allahumma ameen. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallah wa hamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.